Hello, welcome. This is the sixth episode of the Dawsons Auctioneers podcast. This one touches upon the social aspects of the antiques business and the art world and why things are of the form they are due to social circumstances and the like. I thought I'd start off by saying that nothing appears without good cause, without reason for its design or its function. And you will find that trends within the art world are in a response to social climate, fashions, and the like. We can see it happening now, and I'm sure in about 100 years they'll probably look back and say, well, that's why they were wearing that. That's why they were wearing, I don't know, that's why they're listening to podcasts. Because of the rise of on-demand radio, I guess, and it's all a social aspect. People aren't going to be sitting glued to their radios or their televisions anymore. It's all on demand. And, nothing is new under the sun. These things happened. For instance, let's take, for instance, the popularity of music hall. It's not for nothing that the Staffordshire figures, quite a whole swathe of Staffordshire pottery figures, are actually modelled on actors and players from the Victorian Music Hall. And also, there are lots of figures also that are social comment figures. So you had General Booth, who was the instigator of the temperance movement, and he's a popular figure, and he's often replicated in or was replicated in Staffordshire pottery. And so you'll find all sorts of things. You'll find temperance flasks because of the temperance movement. You will find the Queen Victoria's love of the Highlands after Albert's death. You will find lots of people in Scottish costumes, represented in Staffordshire figures. You'll find all sorts of little clues to what was actually going on in society. A lot of it glossed over, obviously. You'll find Georgian sideboards, and you'll find a hatch at the side of them on the right hand side usually, and that was to accommodate a chamber pot because it wasn't seen as anything untoward for you to, during dinner, you'd excuse yourself and you'd go behind a screen and relieve yourself with a chamber pot and then pop it back into the sideboard. And all sorts of different little clues as to why things are. For instance, the carte de visite photographs. The carte de visite photographs came about. I think the first daguerreotype carte de visites were in the sort of 1830s. I think 1835 sort of rings a bell, and it was quite the thing, you see, to have your photograph and your likeness taken. But the carte de visite, you see, it was why there are so many produced. It became a cult to have your image reproduced photographically, but it became quite the thing. If you were going to call, you wouldn't dream of calling on someone without first of all popping a small carte de visite with your intended time of arrival through their door, or you'd give it to someone. I'll be calling on you, hence the name carte de visite. I'll be calling on you at a certain time, we'll take tea and all the rest of it. And a whole cult grew up around that. There are all sorts of different things. There were, for instance, the lacrimatory flasks, tear flasks. I don't know how factual it is, but the idea was that in ancient Greece, the lacrimatory flask was used as we normally see Victorian ones now, and I think they were just literally Victorian ornaments. But the story used to go that in ancient Greece, the lacrimatory flask was filled with tears. It's a long, thin flask with a very small aperture and thin tube in the center, and the idea was that would be the prescribed level of mourning. Once the flask was full of your tears, then you've done your bit and you can go on the raz again. or at least cast off the widow's weeds, as it were. But there's all sorts of things. Another one is you see in auction houses you see a profusion of small marble marble eggs. And the idea, people don't. I mean, their function now has been forgotten largely. But originally, the idea they're now just sort of desk objects and ornaments. You see them in blue john rarely, but they're usually marble of some type. And the idea was that in Regency times, that these were hand coolers, because the idea at the time, very backward, okay, but you've got to bear in mind, this is early 19th century. The idea was that a young lady, if she had a hot and clammy hand, it was a sign of a racy personality. And people attending dances, they would have on the foyer to the dance, you would actually, young ladies would take one of these hand coolers that were actually on a bed of ice, bed of crushed ice from the ice house, and that would be held in the hand whilst they were sitting, waiting to be asked to dance, or looking at the entries on their dance card. And so you see, then the lady would be able to dance with the gentleman, and she wouldn't be seen to be of a racy nature, having a hot and clammy hand. You see, and that's what they were originally. They were hand coolers, and now I see them in catalogues. Very few of them are actually Regency ones. The Regency ones tended to be a lot smaller. But the ones you see now, usually made in India, turned from marble or indeed alabaster, and they're just ornaments. But they did have a function. They were hand coolers. You see hand warmers, but these were hand coolers. Because you see, again, that was driving the social constraint was driving the need for a hand cooler. There are all sorts of different things. There are, for instance, you see quite a lot of amateur paintings round about 1900, 1910-ish, or actually probably about 1890 to about 1910-ish. And that was because of the accessibility of prepared boards and prepared canvases. And also, quite a lot of them were produced in the Highlands, which was left over from Queen Victoria's love of the Highlands, and also in Wales. And it was not for nothing for the fact that actually the extension of the rail lines, so these areas were more accessible. So you could take your prepared canvas, or or your prepared sketchbook, or your watercolor papers, and so you can go and produce your preliminary sketches in situ. And I think probably the early railways the early trains were probably full of people with easels and pastels and all sorts of things. In fact, in Japan, with the opening of the Tokyo Zoo, they had a bit of a debacle, because it was famed for its collection of exotic finches. And it's not for nothing that in the late Meiji period, in the sort of 1880s, I think it was, that quite a lot of exotic finches replicated in Japanese porcelain and in basically in the Japanese canon of decorative motif. And the story, whether it's an apocryphal tale, this business is full of apocryphal tales, but they make a good podcast. The problem was the people of Tokyo were outraged by the fact that they couldn't get near enough to see the actual animals, because right up to the bars were people with sketchbooks and taking notes. So they had to clear them away each day so that the paying public could actually go and see these animals in situ. But it did quite a lot for the Tokyo Art School, because they could look at animals that they hitherto wouldn't have got access to, and they could sketch them in real life. You see, I saw a fantastic tiger, which would have been, which would have probably been seen through bars. Wondrous piece of ivory. Of course, the ban is coming, and we won't see that sort of thing again. I understand why no one wants to see an animal die or suffer, and that's another thing you see. That's another. We're seeing all these things coming along now. For instance, the the Article 10s, CITES are protecting quite rightly too the depleted forests of rosewood in the Amazon, because they're knocking down swathes of these trees, and so now if you sell a piece of 20th century rosewood furniture, you have to apply for an Article 10 in order to sell it, because it becomes a criminal offence otherwise. And I think all of the rosewood family now is covered on the Article 10 restrictions. So again, as we look back, and our children's children, they're going to look back and they're going to see social circumstances leading trends and influencing styles, and why one particular type of timber was used, and why a style was employed for a particular period of time. They're all little clues for the historian. It's just we're looking back at the Victorians and earlier, and I'm sure in years to come they'll be looking back at us. Thank you very much.